Everyone in the neighborhood had heard the stories about the park fountain. They were always passed along in hushed tones, spoken like a curse or a warning. It wasn't something people laughed about. In fact, most didn't speak of it at all. Unless you asked directly, and even then, you'd be lucky to get more than a quick deflection. They said it happened every single night without fail. At the stroke of midnight, the fountain's water would turn red. Not pink, not rusty, not some trick of the light blood red, and no one knew why. There were other parts to the legend, too. Some claimed it was just a prank kids with dye, maybe a busted pipe, but others whispered that those who stayed too long, who lingered to watch the transformation, came back different. If they came back at all, some disappeared, some lost their minds. No one could explain it, and no one seemed eager to try. The first time I heard the story, I was sitting across from my editor at the Tribune. He'd been sorting through a stack of reader-submitted stories when he came across a yellowing envelope, filled with printed pages. He snorted and waved it at me. "Another one about that blood fountain," he muttered, tossing it aside like garbage, tabloid trash, total fiction. But something about the way he said it made me pause. He wasn't just dismissing it, he was uncomfortable. There was a tension in his voice that I hadn't heard before, like he didn't want to talk about it at all. And that piqued my interest. I'd been writing meaningless fluff for months, human interest pieces, product reviews, local grand openings. But this was something else. I wasn't expecting to uncover the next big scoop, but if there was even a sliver of truth to the story, I had to see it for myself. I wasn't chasing fame. I just wanted to know. So that night, I packed up my camera, slipped on a hoodie, and headed for Ashgrove Park. The place was only a few blocks from my apartment, tucked into a quiet corner of the city like a forgotten relic. The streetlights along the way were dim, the sidewalks cracked and uneven. Even before I arrived, the air felt wrong, heavier. Still, the wrought iron gate creaked as I pushed it open, and I stepped into the park, immediately hit by an unnatural chill. The lamps lining the pathways glowed a dull amber, flickering in the darkness like dying fireflies. Trees stood like skeletal guardians on either side of the main trail, their branches bare and twisted. No birds, no rustling leaves, no sound at all. In the center of the park stood the fountain. I had seen photos of it before, but nothing captured the unsettling atmosphere that surrounded it in person. It looked ancient cracked stone, covered in patches of moss and lichen, as though it had been forgotten for decades. A winged statue rose from the center of the basin, its face eroded beyond recognition. Maybe it was supposed to be an angel, maybe a demon. Hard to tell now. It stared upward into nothing, arms raised as if pleading or warning. I glanced at my phone. 11:48 p.m. I sat on the nearest bench and waited. The silence was suffocating. Even the gentle gurgle of water from the fountain's jets seemed muffled. I adjusted my phone's camera settings and tried to steady my nerves. I wasn't scared, not yet, but the anticipation made my skin itch. 11:56. I stood and slowly approached the fountain. The water was perfectly clear, catching the faint light in ripples and reflections. I leaned over, watching, waiting. My breath fogged in the cold air. 11:59. The world around me felt like it had frozen. The wind had died completely. Not even the trees moved. I held my phone tightly, heart pounding, and then it happened. At precisely midnight, the water began to shift. It started as a subtle ripple, just enough to distort the reflection of the statue. But the movement grew, radiating outward from the base of the fountain. Slowly, the color began to change. It bled into the water like ink dropped into a glass, first a faint tint, then darker and darker until the entire basin was a deep, glistening crimson. I staggered back, mouth dry. The smell hit me next, a sharp, metallic tang that was unmistakable. Blood. Real. Thick. Fresh. My instincts told me to run, to get out before something worse happened. But I didn't. I stepped closer, peered into the water. It wasn't just colored. It was thick, viscous, sluggish as it flowed. No bubbles, no trickling. Just the slow churn of something foul and alive. I lifted my phone with trembling hands and took a photo. Then another. There was no one else around. No cameras, no pranksters. Nothing out of place, except the blood. Then, just as slowly as it had begun, the water started to clear. The red receded, pulled downward as if it were being drained. Within moments it was gone. The water looked pure again, sparkling faintly in the dim light. The park was dead silent. I stood there for a long while, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. My logical mind screamed for explanations, rusted pipes, chemicals, lighting tricks. But none of that explained the smell, the thickness, or the silence. This wasn't a prank. I left the park without another word. My thoughts racing. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red water, smelled the iron tang, and I knew without a doubt I was going back. I returned the next night. I told myself it was for documentation, for proof, something I could bring back to the Tribune to justify the time I was sinking into this. But that wasn't the truth. Deep down, I already knew no editor would greenlight this story, no matter how solid the evidence was. This wasn't for the paper anymore. This was for me. I arrived earlier this time, just after 10:30. The park felt even colder than the night before, the air unnaturally still. The iron gate groaned when I pushed it open, echoing into the darkness. I paused, phone in hand, scanning the shadows, almost expecting to see someone or something watching. But the park was empty. The only sound was the faint buzz of a flickering street lamp at the far end of the path. I moved toward the fountain with cautious steps, crunching across the gravel trail. The fountain was just as I remembered it, weathered. Stone, skeletal statue, that oppressive stillness hanging around it like a fog. But tonight something caught my eye. There were dark stains on the base of the fountain, nearly invisible in the poor light. At first, I thought it was water damage, or maybe old moss. But as I knelt down and ran my fingers over the surface, I realized it was something else entirely. Grooves, not cracks, not decay etchings. Deliberate, precise, and old. The symbols had been worn down with time, nearly erased, but I could still trace their shape. They formed a sort of pattern, looping and curling like runes or sigils. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures, but the flash barely captured the depth. Of the carvings, they were subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking for them. As I stood back, brushing stone dust from my palms, a chill skated down my spine. The temperature had dropped again. I could see my breath now, rising in white clouds. Midnight was near. I checked my phone. 11:58. I positioned myself the same as the night before. Just a few feet from the basin, camera at the ready. My heart pounded as the seconds ticked down. Something in the pit of my stomach twisted, a tight, coiling dread I couldn't explain. The moment the clock hit 12 o'clock, the transformation began again. Just like before, the water rippled. Then the red began to rise from below, darkening and thickening with every second, as though the earth beneath the fountain was bleeding. I watched, mesmerized and horrified all at once. The blood seemed darker than before, almost black under. The night sky, its surface sluggish and thick. But then something new happened. A ripple cut across the surface, unnatural and sudden. It wasn't from the jets. It came from underneath. Something was moving beneath the water. I leaned forward, instinctively, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, I could swear I saw a shape of vague distortion, like a hand or face pressing against the surface from below. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The water cleared again, as if nothing had ever happened. I staggered, backward, blood roaring in my ears. My skin was clammy, my breath ragged. I didn't take another photo. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Something was under there. Whatever had caused this phenomenon, if it could still be called that, it was alive. The next morning, I skipped the Tribune altogether. I needed information, real answers. So I went to the city's public library. It was one of the oldest buildings in town, all creaky wooden floors and gust-covered shelves. It took me hours combing through brittle, yellowed records and historical texts, but I finally found something. A reference to Ashgrove Park before. It was a park. Apparently, almost 100 years ago, the land had been home to a grand estate. A mansion owned by the Barrington family wealthy, private and known for throwing extravagant, almost theatrical parties. One winter night, the mansion burned to the ground in what newspapers called a mysterious, unexplained blaze. The entire family perished in the fire. Not a single body was ever recovered. The only thing that remained was the mansion's stone basement, which was eventually filled in and buried right beneath the park fountain. As I was packing up my notes, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, startled, to find an old woman standing near the archive shelves. Her eyes were milky, her posture frail, but there was something alert in her expression. "You're digging where you shouldn't?" she rasped. "Excuse me?" "The fountain," she said softly, leaning closer. "It runs red because it remembers." I stared at her, mouth slightly open. She spoke with a quiet certainty that made my skin crawl. "It's not a message," she continued. "It's a warning. Stop now, or you won't like what you find." I wanted to ask her who she was, how she knew any of this, but the words stuck in my throat. She turned and walked away without another sound, disappearing into the maze of bookshelves. Her words followed me all the way home. That night, as I stood at my apartment window looking out into the city, I felt it again, that pull, that invisible hand dragging me back toward the park. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something stronger. I needed to go back. I didn't even pack a bag this time. I just put on my jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and headed out the door. Something was calling me. The third night, the air felt colder than before, unnaturally so. As I walked back through the park's iron gates, the wind bit into my skin like tiny knives. I zipped my jacket higher. But it didn't help. This cold wasn't from the weather. It was something else, something wrong, like the air itself was rejecting me. The park was dead quiet. No birds, no wind, no rustling leaves. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed to vanish the moment I stepped past the trees. I walked the same path I had the previous nights, my flashlight sweeping across the shadows, catching glimpses of twisted branches and glinting eye squirrels, maybe, or something else. When the fountain came into view, it was exactly as I'd left it, ancient, decaying, and still. But the tension in the air was thicker than before. The ground beneath my feet seemed firmer, colder. Each step toward the fountain felt heavier, like I was walking against a tide I couldn't see. I arrived early again, around 11:15. The fountain's basin reflected the full moon above, the water eerily still. I crouched near the base to study the symbols I had found the night before. They were clearer now, as if the stone had been scrubbed clean, revealing more of their twisted, looping shapes. I ran my fingers along the grooves again, and the stone pulsed with a faint heat. I recoiled. My hand trembled. I stood and stepped back, heart thudding. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. I spun around and shined my flashlight across the trees that bordered the clearing. At first, nothing moved. But then I saw it, a shadow, standing just beyond the tree line. It wasn't moving, it wasn't hiding. It was just there, watching. I flicked the light back toward it, but the figure vanished. My breath hitched. I swept the light across the area again, but there was no sign of anyone. No footsteps. No rustling leaves. Just the quiet splash of the fountain behind me. And then the whispering started. It was faint at first, like someone murmuring just below the surface of the water. I turned, heart pounding, and stepped closer. The whispering grew louder, not in volume, but in clarity. I still couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the intent behind them. Urgent, insistent, hungry. I reached the edge of the fountain and looked down. The water was still clear, but beneath the surface, shadows moved like ink, swirling in water. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I saw something caught in the fountain's central jet, a crumpled piece of paper, soaked and clinging to the stone like dead skin. I hesitated, then reached out, prying the note. Free. It was damp and smeared with what looked like blood. The writing was nearly illegible, the ink smeared across the page in shaky lines. But I could just barely read a few words. The ones below. They are hungry. My breath caught in my throat. Suddenly, the whispering exploded into a flurry of sound. Voices, dozens of them, echoed all around me, whispering over each other in a maddening chorus. My skin prickled with goosebumps as I looked around wildly. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel them, watching, surrounding me. I took a step back, and then I saw it in the water. A face, pale, hollow-eyed, mouth twisted in a silent scream. I spun around, expecting someone behind me. No one. I turned back to the fountain. The water was clear again. The face was gone. Panic surged through me. I backed away, nearly stumbling over the bench behind me. The whispers faded just as quickly, as they had come, replaced by a low, aching moan that seemed to rise from beneath the ground itself. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just some supernatural echo or remnant of a tragic past. There was something alive beneath the fountain. Something that hadn't finished whatever it started, and I was in its way. I turned and fled. The park, the crumpled note still in my hand. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment. My breath was ragged, my chest burning. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then leaned back against it, eyes wide, still listening for whispers. But the apartment was quiet. For now. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale, contorted face rising from the crimson water, heard the whispers closing in from every angle. My apartment felt less like a haven and more like a cell, the silence pressing in, too loud, too complete. The note I'd pulled from the fountain lay on my desk. I had spread it out and tried to preserve it, gently patting it dry with paper towels, careful not to smudge the faded writing any further, the ones below. They are hungry. It looked old, like it had been submerged for years. The ink had bled into the fibers and dark stains blotted much of the text, but I couldn't help wondering who wrote it, and when. I needed answers, not rumors, not urban legends. Real history. I called in sick and headed straight back to the library. This time, I didn't browse aimlessly. I asked to access the city's historical archives, and after enough pleading, the elderly librarian reluctantly led me down a narrow staircase, into a musty basement filled with yellowed documents and forgotten records. Time seemed slower down there, the fluorescent lights flickering like dying stars above rusted filing cabinets. Hours passed. I combed through property records, death certificates, newspaper clippings, anything related to the land Ashgrove Park sat on. Eventually I found it, Barrington Estate. According to the documents, it had once been the largest private home in the area. The family Charles and Evelyn Barrington and their 2 children were reclusive, wealthy, and widely disliked by the community. The rumors surrounding them were numerous. Black tie masquerade balls with no guest lists, rituals performed under the full moon, strange symbols carved into the mansion's stone foundation. There were vague references to their interest in the occult books ordered from Europe, donations to esoteric societies, and complaints from neighbors about chanting heard late at night. Then the fire. It happened in the dead of winter. Nearly 100 years ago, a mysterious blaze consumed the entire estate in a matter of minutes. Eyewitnesses described it as unnaturally fast, like the fire had burst up from the ground. No one survived. No bodies were recovered. And according to one obscure clipping from a forgotten newspaper, the mansion's stone basement was never demolished. It had simply been filled in and sealed off. And the park fountain. It sat directly above where the mansion's basement had once been. I was halfway through scribbling notes when I felt someone behind me. I turned and saw her, the old woman from the other day, standing just beyond the doorway, her silhouette ghost-like in the hallway light. "He didn't listen," she said quietly. Her voice was calm but filled with sorrow. I stood startled. "Who are you?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is what you've stirred up. The fountain runs red because it remembers," she said again, just like before. You said it's a warning, I replied, stepping closer. But from what? What happened there? She looked past me toward the files on the table. The Barringtons were obsessed with what lies beyond, she whispered. They believed the world was a veil, and that beneath it, something greater, something older, was waiting. They tried to open a door to that place, and when the fire came, they weren't killed. They were trapped. Trapped where? I asked. In the space between, she said, and I swear her eyes pale and clouded as they were seen to shimmer for a moment. They didn't die, they became part of it. Now it feeds through the fountain. Each night it rises, hungry, waiting to be finished. My blood turned cold. You're saying the ritual wasn't completed? She nodded. They tried to open a gate, but the fire stopped them before they could finish. That's why it hasn't ended. That's why it calls. Calls who? She didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner without a sound. Her final words echoed in my mind. It calls. That night, I didn't even hesitate. I found myself heading back to the park, flashlight and journal in my backpack. Phone at the ready. The note was in my pocket. The symbols I'd photographed earlier were burned into my mind. Ash Grove Park was dead quiet again, as if it had been waiting. The closer I got to the fountain, the more intense the pressure in the air became. It wasn't fear, it was gravity. A pull, dragging me towards something I couldn't see, but could feel in every cell of my body. The hairs on my arms stood up. My breath became shallow. I checked the time. 11:53. I took a seat on the same bench as the night before. This time, I didn't focus on my camera or my phone. I just watched the fountain. I didn't move. I didn't blink. When the clock hit midnight, the transformation was instant. The red surged upward like a geyser this time, not slow and creeping like before. The water turned thick and oily, the surface breaking apart into slow-moving currents of liquid the color of fresh blood. The scent was worse then. Ever so strong I gagged. But I didn't move. The fountain pulsed, not just the water. The stone pulsed. A deep rhythmic throb like a heartbeat. The earth beneath my feet vibrated with it. I pressed my hand to the base of the fountain and felt it warm, alive. Then the visions came. Not dreams. Not hallucinations. Visions I saw fire. Endless. And roaring. The mansion in flames. I saw a circle of figures cloaked in black, arms raised, chanting. A symbol drawn in blood. A gateway slowly opening in the floor. Screams that weren't from burning, but from something trying to come through. I staggered back, breaking the connection. The blood-red water stilled, and then I knew. The ritual wasn't over. It was waiting for someone to finish it. I didn't sleep that night, again. Instead, I sat on my bathroom floor until sunrise, hunched over, the taste of iron still thick in my throat. I kept the journal open in front of me, scrawling notes I could barely make sense of, symbols from the fountain, fragments of Latin phrases I remembered from the visions, and at the center of it all, the ones below, they're hungry. But this wasn't just a haunting. This was a summoning left incomplete, a door half open. And somehow, I had become part of it, chosen, lured. It didn't matter. I knew now that I couldn't walk away from it. It wouldn't let me. The following afternoon, I returned to Ash Grove. Not the park, but the surrounding area. I started knocking on doors, asking older residents if they remembered anything strange about the Barrington family or the mansion before the fire. Most slammed the door in my face or stared at me like I was insane. But one woman, maybe in her 80s, let me in. She lived just a few blocks from the park, in a crumbling brick house filled with dust and old books. Her hands trembled when she poured tea. She didn't drink it. She just sat across from me and said, they weren't just rich. They were devoted. To what? I asked. To what's beneath? I felt that familiar cold settle into my spine. They believed in a world beneath ours, she continued. A place not of fire or brimstone, but of hunger. Endless hunger. They tried to open the way to feed it something precious. Their bloodline. I stared at her. You're saying they meant to sacrifice themselves? She nodded slowly. And something stopped them? Or maybe it didn't? Before I could ask anything else, she stood, shuffled over to a cabinet, pulled something from the back of a drawer and returned. A small rusted blade wrapped in a strip of cloth. This was found in the ruins, she said. A relic, covered in their symbols. A tool for bloodletting. I've kept it all these years, but I think it's meant for you now. I hesitated before taking it. The metal was cold, even through the cloth, ancient, with a strange weight that felt heavier than it should. It hummed faintly, like it recognized me. That night, I returned to the fountain, for the last time. I reached the park just before midnight. The cold was worse than ever. My breath hung in thick clouds, and my fingers went numb even in my gloves. But I wasn't afraid, not like before. I felt numb, resolute. The fountain stood still, silent, waiting. I walked to the base, and knelt where I'd first discovered the grooves. I removed the knife from my bag, unwrapping it slowly, reverently. It glinted in the moonlight, despite the rust. I traced the blade over the stone, aligning it with the symbols. The ground beneath me pulsed. 11:59. The red came faster this time, almost eager. The water didn't rise so much as erupt, jetting upward in a thick column that splashed across the stone in thick, heavy slaps. It wasn't just red anymore. It was darker, almost black, and smelled worse, not just of blood, but rot, like something long dead was being disturbed. Then came the whispers, not gentle or eerie now. They were angry, demanding, screaming without sound. My ears rang with the force of them, my vision blurring at the edges. And then the shadows came. They emerged from the trees, from behind benches, from the very ground, figures pale and twisted, their faces hollow, mouths open in silent agony. I recognized some of them from old photographs, the Barrington family. The parents, the children. Their eyes locked onto mine, and they reached. I raised the knife instinctively. Their forms shuddered. Then I saw it, the center of the fountain. The statue was glowing faintly now, and beneath the red water, I could see something turning, like gears, like a seal. The ritual circle. It was incomplete. The vision had shown me that. One symbol missing, one element left undone. And I realized, with a sick certainty, that the knife wasn't meant to summon. It was meant to seal. I stepped closer, ignoring the whispers, the shadows closing in. I placed the blade's tip into a groove in the stone where the final symbol should be. It fit perfectly. The fountain screamed. Not the statue, not the ghosts, the stone itself, the earth. A roar from beneath, like the grinding of ancient gates, slamming shut. The water churned violently, waves of black-red liquid crashing against the stone edge. The shadows screamed too one long, unified wail of agony and fury. They surged toward me. I plunged the knife deep into the groove. Light burst from the stone, blinding white and burning hot. The shadows recoiled instantly, disintegrating like ash in wind. The fountain cracked at its base, splitting down the middle. The red liquid drained rapidly, sucked into a widening fissure beneath it. I twisted the blade. The world shook. The ground groaned, and I saw the final symbol appear, glowing with heat. The seal was closing. The doorway was being slammed shut. And just before the light faded, I saw them, the Barringtons, standing in the fountain center, their expressions no longer twisted but relieved. They nodded once, then they were gone, and everything went still. The water stopped. The light faded. The whispers vanished. Only the wind remained, gentle and cold. I slumped to the ground, the knife still in my hand. The ritual was over. Or so I thought. The silence that followed was so complete, so suffocating. It felt like the world had stopped breathing. I stayed there, kneeling at the edge of the fountain, staring into the now clear water. My hands trembled. My chest heaved. But the whispers were gone. The shadows had vanished. The ground had stilled beneath me. The fountain, cracked and quiet, no longer pulsed or bled. It was over. I sat there for a long time. The adrenaline drained from my body in waves, leaving me cold and dazed. I watched the faint trickle of clear water drip from the broken spout, trailing down into a cracked basin, like nothing had ever happened. The symbols, once glowing and alive, were now dull carvings in cold stone. The knife lay beside me, the edge dark with old blood and fresh rust. I didn't touch it again. Eventually, I gathered myself, packed up my bag. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. I just walked out of the park as dawn began to rise. The first rays of sunlight cutting through the trees and casting long, pale shadows across the gravel path. The gates creaked close behind me, back in my apartment. I collapsed into bed, fully clothed. For the first time in days, I slept, and when I woke, the world seemed normal, almost insultingly so. The sunlight poured through the windows, and birds chirped outside. I sat up slowly, expecting pain or dread or some final omen waiting in the shadows. But there was nothing, just quiet. I stood, stretched, and shuffled toward the bathroom, still groggy and sore. My hand reached for the light switch automatically. It flickered, once, twice, then steadied. I stared at it for a moment before turning toward the mirror and froze. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't me. The face was mine, yes. The eyes, the hair, the stubble. But the eyes, they were darker, slightly off. The whites were grayer, the irises clouded, as if something were swimming just beneath the surface. The mouth twitched just enough to be wrong. Then it smiled. I didn't. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The reflection's smile widened. "You've only begun," it whispered. But the voice didn't come from my mouth. It came from the mirror. I spun around, expecting someone behind me. Nothing. I turned back. The reflection still stared, still smiling, still mouthing the words. "You opened the door," it whispered. Again, this time more softly, almost affectionately. "You just didn't close it all the way." I screamed and threw the nearest object I could grab, a bottle of soap. It shattered against the mirror. Glass spiderwebbed outward in a perfect pattern, distorting the face. But behind the cracks, the reflection still stared, still smiled. The whispering began again. Not just from the mirror now, from everywhere. The pipes, the walls, the floorboards. Soft at first, familiar, hungry. That's when I realized the curse hadn't ended. It had just shifted. It had followed. In the following days, I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was trauma. Maybe I imagined it. I even booked a hotel for a few nights. But the whispers came with me, in the vents, in the static on the television, in the elevator shaft. And each time I looked in a mirror, the eyes weren't quite mine. They watched me now, constantly. Sometimes I catch them moving a second too late. Sometimes the mouth moves when mine doesn't. I've stopped shaving, stopped turning on the bathroom lights, stopped looking. But I know it's there. Some nights, I wake to find my reflection standing just outside the mirror, still smiling. Last night, I found water pooling under my bed. I followed the trail to the bathroom, and there it was, the faucet dripping thick, red drops that stained the porcelain sink. I shut off the water, but in the mirror, the tap kept running. The voice comes more clearly now, no longer whispers. It talks to me, warns me, laughs at me. "You weren't the first," it says. "But you'll be the last." I think I know. What it means, I didn't close the door. I tethered it to myself. The Barringtons weren't just summoning something. They were becoming part of it, binding themselves to the hunger below. And when I finished their ritual, when I drove that knife into the stone and sealed the circle, I didn't just stop the awakening. I became its anchor. Every night now at midnight, I hear the splash of water, not from the park. From my bathroom, from my walls, from inside me, something came through. And it's still watching, still waiting. And I think just maybe it's using me to find a new way out. So if you ever hear whispering through the pipes at night, or if your reflection smiles just a little too wide, don't answer, don't look. And for the love of God, don't go near the fountain. The jungle was alive with sound. Chirping insects filled the air with their rhythmic pulse. Birds called in strange harmonies from high above the canopy, and leaves rustled with every gust of the humid breeze. But the moment we stepped into the clearing where the ruins began to rise from the earth like broken teeth, the noise stopped. It wasn't gradual, it was sudden, as if someone had pressed mute on the entire forest. I froze mid-step, my boots crunching lightly on the mossy ground. Even the insects had gone silent. I glanced back at the others. Megan, our cartographer, paused beside me with furrowed brows. Dr. Tran, our lead archaeologist, raised a hand, listening. Then slowly he turned back toward the trail and shook his head. The locals warned us, he muttered. Said the forest goes quiet when the spirits are awake. I scoffed under my breath, though unease prickled my skin. Superstition, I said, but even I wasn't convinced by my tone. The villagers we had passed earlier that week had refused to follow us this far. They spoke in hushed tones about curses, about voices in the dark. I had dismissed it all as folklore until now. The ruins loomed ahead, ancient stone structures. Choked by vines and thyme, they were unlike any I had seen before. Towering, jagged, covered in glyphs we couldn't decipher. According to our initial research, the site had never been formally cataloged. We were the first official expedition here. That night, as we settled into our tents on the edge of the clearing, the unease lingered. We built a fire, made careful notes of the structures, and documented the symbols, but no one spoke much. Conversation came in starts and stops. No one wanted to admit they were spooked. I lay in my tent, the flap cracked open to let in the thick night air, and stared at the stars through the canopy. My body was tired, but my mind churned. As I drifted toward sleep, I heard it soft, distant, barely a whisper. My name. It was so faint, I thought I had imagined it. I sat up, heart thudding. Megan, I called out softly. No reply. The fire outside had dimmed to embers. The jungle was silent. I lay back down, trying to convince myself it had been the wind. The next morning, I rose before the others. That whisper had rooted itself in my mind, coiled around my thoughts like a vine. I couldn't shake it. Couldn't ignore the way it had sounded like someone familiar. I grabbed my pack and a flashlight and walked toward the structure we had discovered the day before, a stepped pyramid partially buried by earth and foliage. There, tucked behind the western edge, we'd uncovered a narrow stone staircase descending into the dark. My team wanted to wait before exploring it. Too unstable, they'd said, but I was drawn to it irresistibly. As I stood at the mouth of the stairwell, the temperature dropped. The air that flowed up from below was cold, damp, and thick, with the smell of mildew and something older, something musty, a kind of smell that didn't belong in a jungle. I turned on my flashlight. Its beam flickered slightly. Batteries were fresh, but still the light pulsed like a heartbeat. I told myself it was just the humidity. Then I began to descend. Each step echoed softer at first, then sharper the deeper I went. The walls closed in, tight and damp, the stone slick with condensation. I ran my hand along the side as I descended, the texture smooth in places and jagged in others. The air became heavier, my breathing slowed. It felt like I was walking into a different world. Halfway down, I stopped. I didn't know why. I just did. And then I heard it again. My name. This time, louder, closer. Whispered, but clear. A breathless, urgent voice drifting up from the darkness below. My heart skipped. My skin broke into goosebumps. I spun, flashlight shaking, its beam slicing through the dark. Hello? I called. Nothing. Silence swallowed my voice. Not even. The echo came back. For a moment, I considered turning back. But that same strange pull urged me forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was madness. I descended further, one slow step at a time. Finally, the staircase opened into a massive underground chamber. I gasped. My flashlight beam panned across it, revealing walls covered in strange pulsing symbols and towering statues carved into the stone. Their eyes were hollow, sunken, but watching. Always watching. I stepped inside. The air was ice cold. My breath came in puffs of fog. The sound of dripping water echoed somewhere far off, rhythmic and slow, like a ticking clock. I walked deeper into the chamber, stepping over broken stones and what looked like shattered offerings, clay jars, bones, ancient jewelry. As I passed the statues, I couldn't help but feel like they turned ever so slightly to follow me. My flashlight caught glimpses of carvings, symbols that writhed just beyond understanding, too complex to be purely decorative. And then I heard it again. My name this time not a whisper, but a full sentence. Please ... help me. I spun toward the far end of the chamber, where rubble half buried what looked like an altar. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't alone down here. And something beneath the ruins knew my name. I stood frozen in the middle of the underground chamber, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The voice had been too real, too clear to be my imagination. It hadn't echoed like a normal sound. It had curled around me like breath on the back of my neck, and spoken my name, pleading, please, help me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to climb those stairs and run until the jungle swallowed me whole. But I didn't move. Instead, I took a cautious step toward the altar. It sat like a broken heart at the far end of the chamber, half buried in rubble, with dark stains seeping from cracks in the stone. My flashlight danced across it, illuminating what looked like dried blood smeared across the top, trailing down to the floor like something had been dragged. Vines grew up around it, as if the jungle itself was trying to reclaim or bury it. The voice hadn't spoken again, but the silence was worse. My footsteps echoed sharply as I approached. Each one felt like it reverberated a little too long, like the chamber was absorbing the sound or responding to it. A strange pressure built in my skull, like my ears were popping, but there was no elevation change. Just weight, invisible weight pressing against my thoughts. I reached the altar and hesitated. The stone was worn smooth at the top, as if countless hands had rested there. Cracks split its surface like veins. A faint, metallic tang filled. Air, blood, and rot. I extended a hand. The moment my fingers brushed the altar, a shriek exploded through the chamber. My name again ripped from the throat of something in pain, or rage, or both. I staggered backward, nearly falling over the rubble behind me. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then flared again. The shriek died into echoes that ran wild through the cavern. It didn't sound like it came from a speaker, or even a human voice. It was warped, layered like many voices shouting at once. I backed away from the altar, heart pounding in my chest. And that's when I noticed the walls, the carvings. At first glance, they had looked like symbols, intricate winding shapes, chiseled deep into the stone. But now I saw the figures. The people. They were kneeling, heads bowed, arms raised to a towering shape that loomed in the center of the panel. A figure with no face, just a vertical slit where eyes should be, and arms far too long. In the next panel, the people were bleeding, thin red streams flowing from their hands, their chests, their mouths into a pit. And in the final panel, they were gone. Only the pit remained. Black, gaping, empty. No, not empty. A pair of glowing slits hovered within its eyes or something like them. A cold shiver ran through me. This wasn't just a place of worship. It was a place of sacrifice. And the thing they were worshiping wasn't human. I stepped back, again, and tripped over something half buried in dust. My flashlight flashed downward. It was a dagger. Ancient, rusted, but still intact. Its curved blade was stained dark, impossibly dark, and the hilt bore the same symbols as the carvings on the wall. My hand reached out on its own, curling around it. The moment my skin touched the hilt, the dagger pulsed. A low hum vibrated through my bones like it was waking up. I nearly dropped it, but forced myself to hold steady. The metal was icy cold, and suddenly the voice returned, louder, clearer, closer. Why did you leave me? My blood ran cold. That voice, it wasn't just familiar. It was intimate. It sounded like someone I once knew, someone I had buried, my sister. She died 5 years ago. Car accident. No survivors. No, I whispered. No, this can't be. The voice shifted. Please, help me. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight sweeping across the vast chamber. Shadows danced. The statue seemed closer than before, watching, listening, and then I saw it movement. Near the far wall where one of the carvings had crumbled, a shape, a figure. It darted behind a broken column before I could shine my light directly on. I called out without thinking. Who's there? No answer. But the voice returned. Come closer. I clutched the dagger tighter. The symbols on the blade were glowing now faintly, but enough to illuminate the immediate area in a sickly bluish hue. I could feel something deep in the earth, stirring. I took a step back toward the altar and noticed something new, a torn, weathered journal half buried under loose stone. I grabbed it and flipped it open. The pages were warped and faded, but the writing inside was jagged, rushed, growing increasingly panicked. They speak in your voice. They speak in your thoughts. They show you what you long to see. They feed on memory. The last entry chilled me to my core. The deeper you go, the more they become you. I heard my daughter last night, but she's been dead 20 years. The page was smeared with what looked like blood. I closed the journal, heart racing. The weight of the silence pressed in again. The voice was quiet now, but the damage was done. I knew I wasn't just hearing things. I was being hunted by something that knew my memories, my grief, my guilt, something that wanted me to follow. And I wasn't sure I could resist. The journal trembled in my hands, the final page whispering madness from beyond the grave. I closed it slowly, fingers numb, eyes locked on the crumbling altar. Something about the way it sat in this chamber, surrounded by darkness, made it feel more like a gate than a monument. My flashlight flickered in. That's when I noticed a pit. It hadn't been visible before. Maybe the dust and stone had concealed it, or maybe the shifting of the chamber revealed it only when it wanted to be found. But now it sat exposed, yawning open at the base of the altar, like the mouth of a sleeping giant. A perfect black circle, cut into the floor, its edges impossibly smooth. It devoured the light. My flashlight's beam vanished into it like it had hit water. The voice returned. Please, help me. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a vibration deep, low, felt in the chest rather than heard in the ears. I took a step forward, unable to help myself, drawn like a moth to flame. It sounded like my sister again, soft, fragile, terrified. Emily? I whispered. No answer. Just that steady pulse, like a heartbeat in a stone. I leaned over the pit, flashlight pointed down. Nothing, just the endless dark. Then, from the void, came a breath, a gentle exhale of cold air that kissed my face. And the voice spoke again. It's so dark down here. I'm so cold. I reeled back, stumbling over broken tiles, catching myself on a nearby statue. My skin crawled. Logic screamed that it couldn't be her. She was dead, gone, but the ache in my chest, the raw scar left by her death, flared to life with a vengeance. That's when I remembered the journal's warning. They'll use your memories against you. I clenched my jaw, trying to focus. Think, breathe. But the air was growing colder, heavier, more oppressive. Each breath filled my lungs with damp rot. The symbols on the walls began to shimmer faintly, as if reacting to my presence. The carvings twisted under the beam of my light, their rigid lines shifting into something more organic, more alive. The figures, once stoic, now bent and twisted in agony, their mouths open in eternal screams. And the pit pulsed again once. Then again, stronger, like a heartbeat syncing with mine. I turned to leave, desperate to get back to the surface. But, as I did, a shape darted across my path. A shadow, fast and tall, moving with unnatural grace. I stopped dead. My light swung around, Nothing. But then I heard it again. Not a whisper, not a cry, but my own voice. From inside the pit, "Don't leave me." I stood frozen, unable to think, unable to breathe. The voice was identical. Inflection, tone. Even the desperation was mine. It was as if the pit had opened its mouth and stolen the sound from my own throat. "No," I said, backing up. "This isn't real." But the voice answered, "I know you're scared." My hand tightened around the dagger. The symbols along the blade glowed faintly now, casting an eerie blue halo across the floor. I didn't know how or why, but I could feel something inside it. A kind of static charge that wasn't electricity, but intention. Purpose. It was meant to fight something, and whatever was in this place wasn't human. I edged toward the exit, flashlight scanning the chamber again. The statues now looked warped, almost as if they'd shifted positions. One of them, previously facing the altar, was turned slightly toward me. "Impossible," I muttered. The carvings along the walls rippled as if they were etched in water instead of stone. I heard soft footsteps behind me and spun around, blade raised. Nothing, just dust, stone, and silence. And then the whispering began again. But not just one. Voice, dozens, hundreds, a chorus of overlapping whispers, all speaking my name, overlapping until it became an unintelligible static of sound and breath. My skull throbbed, my knees buckled. A figure appeared at the edge of the pit. I knew instantly it wasn't my sister. It wore her face, young, beautiful, eyes filled with sadness, but it was wrong. Too perfect, unmoving, like a porcelain mask over something hideous. Her lips didn't move, but the voice still came. "Come with me." The figure extended a hand. I took a step back. "No," I said. Her eyes locked onto mine. And for a moment, her mouth opened just slightly, and I saw the truth. Beneath that human face was something else entirely. Rows of teeth. Endless blackness. A hunger so old it had forgotten the taste of silence. I turned and ran. The chamber roared behind me, voices screeching in unison. The earth shook. The pit screamed. Stones fell from the ceiling. Dust choked the air. I stumbled through the dark, following the path back toward the stairs, praying the exit was still there. I didn't dare look back. Something was behind me. Something that now knew who I was. Something that had tasted my voice, my grief, and found it intoxicating. I burst through the tunnel mouth, lungs burning, legs screaming with every step. The jungle night met me like a wall, humid and heavy, but even that suffocating heat was a mercy after the freezing dark of the ruins below. I didn't stop running until the silhouette of our camp flickered through the trees, and then I stopped, dead still. Something was wrong. Our tents were there just as we'd left them. Equipment cases sat in their places, and a generator buzzed softly, casting weak light across the clearing. But it was too quiet. Not the silence of the jungle. No insects, no birds, not even the distant yip of a monkey. Just a low electric hum and a strange stillness in the air. I took a hesitant step forward, scanning the shadows. No one came to greet me. No one called my name. Where was everyone? "Marco?" I called out. "I'm back." Nothing. I tried. And louder this time. "Danny? Reese? Come on, this isn't funny." Only the generator replied, its buzz sounding suddenly like the growl of something breathing. My stomach twisted. I passed by the fire pit cold ashes. Beyond that, the food tent untouched. I peeked into the main supply shelter. No one, not even signs of a struggle. It was like they'd vanished mid-action. A half-drunk coffee mug. A notebook left open. A jacket hanging on a chair, and then I heard it. A single word, faint, behind me. "Hey!" I turned so fast I nearly fell. Standing near the edge of camp was Marco, or something wearing him. He looked wrong, too stiff, smiling too much. His eyes didn't blink. They were glassy and wide like a mannequin that hadn't learned how to be human yet. "Where'd you go?" he asked. The voice was his, but it echoed faintly, layered with something else. My mouth went dry. Marco, I missed you, he said. We all missed you. Behind him, more figures appeared. Donnie, Reese, even our porter, Elias, all of them smiling. Too much teeth. Too still. And all of them speaking in unison. We're so glad you came back. I stumbled backward. No, that's not. You freed us, they said together. I turned and ran again. Branches clawed at my arms and face, but I didn't stop. I didn't care about the gear, the tents, them. They weren't real anymore. Whatever had crawled out of that pit had reached the surface. And it wore their faces. I ran until my lungs gave out. Then I collapsed against a tree and slid down, heart hammering, dagger still clutched in my hand. That's when I heard her again. Why are you running from me? I looked up. Emily. She stood just a few feet away, barefoot in the mud, her hair hanging wet around her face. She looked exactly as I remembered her the day before the accident. Her hoodie, her mismatched socks, her little smirk. I almost believed it. Almost. Then she spoke again. You brought the knife? She said. Good. And the illusion cracked. Her mouth didn't move when the words came. Her eyes twitched in separate directions. And the skin beneath her jaw shifted, like something was pressing against it from the inside, trying to remember how to wear it. You don't belong here, I said, raising the dagger. We do now, it said with her mouth. You opened the way. We only needed your name. My knees buckled as the weight of it hit me. That voice calling to me in the ruins, the whispers, the face. They weren't trying to kill me down there. They were trying to learn me, mimic me, take my shape. The moment I answered, the moment I listened, it was already too late. I didn't free you, I whispered, voice shaking. I sealed the pit. The thing that wore my sister's face tilted its head. Did you? And then she smiled. It wasn't Emily's smile. It was a snarl cut into flesh, like something stretching its mouth too wide just to show it could. The pit was never the prison, it said. My breath caught. It was the door. I lunged without thinking, dagger raised. But the thing vanished into the trees, melting into shadow like smoke. I stumbled forward, slashing at the air, shouting Emily's name until my voice broke. But it was gone. And the jungle fell silent again. I returned to the ruins at dawn. I don't know what I expected. Closure? Retribution? Answers? But the staircase was gone. Where the stone descent once yawned was now solid rock. No seam. No crack. No opening. Just smooth, moss-covered stone. As if nothing had ever been there. It was like the earth had sealed it shut in the night, and the silence. It was different now. Not expectant. Not ominous. Just waiting like it had gotten what it wanted. I stood at the place where the staircase had been, my hand pressed against the stone, willing it to give, to crack, to reopen. But it was sealed, not buried, gone. As if the earth itself had swallowed it back and erased the scar. The dagger pulsed faintly in my grip. Its glow had dimmed, but it wasn't gone. That was the only reason I hadn't collapsed completely, because this ancient blade, whatever its purpose, was still reacting to something, and that meant it wasn't over. I sat at the edge of the ruined courtyard and stared at the treetops for hours. I watched sunlight shift across the vines. I listened for sounds of birds, monkeys, even wind. But the jungle was still mute, like the air itself had been replaced with cotton. My mind returned again and again to what the thing in Emily's face had said. The pit was never the prison. It was the door. And now the door was open. When I finally returned to the camp again, I did so with slow, deliberate steps, every muscle in my body tense. The tents were still there. The generator still hummed. But it wasn't our camp anymore. The gear was wrong. Subtle things. A compass that spun endlessly. A backpack that had too many zippers. A map where the ink bled in unfamiliar lines. Even the photos pinned to our corkboard, our group smiling at the ruins, had changed. Our eyes were too wide. Our smiles too fixed. Like something had remembered the idea of a human, but not the details. And then there was Danny, sitting by the fire pit, poking at cold ashes with a stick. I stopped several feet away. The dagger clenched tight. "Donnie," I said carefully. She turned slowly. Her face was exactly right down to the tiny mole on her cheek. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I believed it. Until she smiled. That same two-eyed grin. The smile. That had no fear in it. No grief. Just performance. "I thought you'd never come back," she said. I didn't answer. "Why don't you sit? We saved your seat." She gestured to a log across from her. And one by one, the others stepped from the tents. Marco, Reese, Elias, each of them moving just wrong enough to send my nerves screaming. Reese scratched his neck like he was mimicking an action he'd seen, but never felt. Elias blinked far too slowly. Marco's breath came in perfect rhythm, no rise or fall of his chest. "None of you are real," I said. They laughed together, like a choir hitting the same pitch at once. "It didn't sound human. You opened the way," Donnie said again. "We were trapped in stories, echoes, but now we're here." I took a step back. "They didn't follow?" "You don't need to run anymore," Marco said gently. "We know you. We understand you. That's more than anyone else ever has." Behind me, I heard another voice, one I hadn't heard in years. "Alex." I turned. It was my father. Dead for nearly 10 years, but standing there in the jungle like he'd never left. His beard was grayer than I remembered. His eyes kind, warm, familiar. "Stop running," he said softly. "You don't have to be afraid." My throat tightened. He stepped forward, reaching out a hand. I backed up instinctively. The dagger. "Now held between us. You're not him." "I remember when you broke your arm," he said. "3rd grade. Fell out of the apple tree by the old creek. You cried all the way to the hospital, and when the nurse asked what happened, you said, 'I lost the fight with gravity.' My knees buckled slightly. They didn't just know me. They knew everything about me. Memories, moments, emotions. And they were wearing them like costumes." "You're not real," I whispered again. He stepped closer. "Would it matter if I was?" Behind me, the others began circling slowly. "We can be real," Donnie said. "We can be whatever you need." I shut my eyes. The dagger pulsed once, and I remembered the journal, the frantic handwriting, the final entry. "They'll use your memories. Don't listen." But I had listened, and they had followed. They were the echoes of something older than language, something trapped in ritual, bound in stone. And when I stepped into that pit, I brought them back with me. I opened my eyes. "No." Donnie froze. "No, I don't want this." "I don't want you." They twitched. Marco frowned. "Why? We're better than what's waiting for you up there. Better than grief. Better than being alone. I'm not alone." "Then why did you answer the voice?" Donnie hissed. "That stopped me?" My grip faltered. Why had I answered? Why had I gone deeper when I should have fled? Because part of me wanted to believe it was real. That something impossible had reached out. That maybe, just maybe, the dead could speak. They fed on that hope. And now they wore it like skin? "No more," I said. "You're not my memories. You're a virus, a mimic." The jungle darkened around me. The trees blurred. Shadows lengthened, and Danny bared her teeth. "So be it," she said. They rushed me. I held my ground. And the dagger glowing bright now cut through the illusion. Like lightning, the moment they lunged, I swung the dagger in a wide arc, its glowing edge slicing through shadow like a blade through mist. Their bodies didn't bleed. They ripped. Their faces tore like canvas, revealing darkness beneath a void writhing. With pale tendrils and empty mouths, Marco screamed, not with pain, but with rage. His voice fractured mid-yell, splitting into dozens of voices. Children, old men, my sister, my father overlapping and echoing into the trees. I stumbled backward, breathing hard, the dagger burning in my grip. Donnie's body collapsed in front of me, twitching. But instead of blood, the ground beneath her sank, like the soil itself recoiled from what she had become. Her skin crumbled, flaking off like ash, and underneath nothing. Just blackness. They weren't beings. They were voids. And now that they had tasted form, They wanted permanence. I turned and ran again, crashing through the trees deeper into the jungle than I had ever dared go. The sky above was now blood orange wrong. Like the rules of reality had begun to rot. My surroundings blurred, but I didn't stop. The voices chased me, names from my past, whispered regrets, take promises. I heard my mother calling from the trees, my childhood dog barking from the bushes, even Emily crying softly behind me. Why did you leave me? I didn't answer. I knew now. Every time I answered, every time I listened, they got stronger. Finally, I reached the cliff, the edge of the basin, where the jungle ended and the world returned. The sky above the cliff was normal, blue, real, but behind me the jungle howled. They were coming, and they were angry. I spun around, gripping the dagger tighter than ever. The trees were bending toward me, their branches curled like hands. The air was thick with fog, now alive with whispering. You opened the way. You let us in. We are you. From the undergrowth, dozens of forms began emerging. People I'd lost, people I loved, even people I'd forgotten. All of them perfect, and all of them wrong. One of them, my childhood friend Max, stepped forward, eyes black and mouth curled unnaturally wide. You don't have to be alone, he said. I raised the dagger. You're right, I whispered. But I'd rather be alone than be one of you. The cliff beneath my feet cracked slightly. I looked down, and that's when I understood. The dagger wasn't just a weapon. It was a key. I could hear it humming now, not in my hand, but in the ground, in the air. It had connected me to the door, and if I had opened it, maybe I could close it. The jungle creatures circled, hissing, and snarling and whispering and smiling. I took a step toward the edge. They screamed, "You don't know what you're doing. You'll become one of us. You'll never be rid of us." They rushed, and I jumped. I don't remember. Hitting the bottom. All I know is black, silence, cold, then heat, pain, and the dagger glowing. Now with blinding white light pressed into my palm, I was back in the pit. Except now it was vast, infinite, a swirling abyss of forms, voices, fragments of identities all colliding and tearing and reforming. And in the center of it all, the core, a throbbing, living mass of shadow. The source. They weren't just imitating me. They were becoming me. I stepped forward. They sensed me. Hundreds of them turned twisted masks of loved ones and strangers, wearing flesh-like clothing, mouths stretching open with one endless broken chant. Stay. I plunged the dagger into the core. The scream that followed shattered reality. The chamber ruptured. The void shrieked. Everything fell apart. I woke up in a hospital. A white room. Beeping machines. 4 drip. A nurse by the door. My wrists were bandaged. My chest hurt. My lungs burned. A doctor entered. Smiling. You're lucky, he said. Found by a rescue team 3 days after your distress signal went off. Your team was never located. I blinked. Tried to speak. Rest, he said. You're safe now. I slept again. But when I woke up, they were still with me. It started small. The nurse humming a song only my sister used to sing. A janitor who walked like my father. A reflection that didn't blink when I did, then the whispers, late at night. In the vents, in the sink drains behind the mirror. You came back. You brought us. We followed the crack in you. I tried to tell them. They said it was trauma, hallucinations. I stopped trying. Now, I don't sleep with the lights off. I don't walk past mirrors at night. I check faces. I return to the ruins at dawn. I don't know what I expected. Closure? Retribution? Answers? But the staircase was gone. Where the stone descent once yawned was now solid rock. No seam. No crack. No opening. Just smooth, moss-covered stone. As if nothing had ever been there. It was like the earth had sealed it shut in the night, and the silence. It was different now. Not expectant. Not ominous. Just waiting, like it had gotten what it wanted. I stood at the place where the staircase had been, my hand pressed against the stone, willing it to give, to crack, to reopen. But it was sealed, not buried, gone. As if the earth itself had swallowed it back and erased the scar. The dagger pulsed faintly in my grip. Its glow had dimmed, but it wasn't gone. That was the only reason I hadn't collapsed completely, because this ancient blade, whatever its purpose, was still reacting to something, and that meant it wasn't over. I sat at the edge of the ruined courtyard and stared at the treetops for hours. I watched sunlight shift across the vines. I listened for sounds of birds, monkeys, even wind. But the jungle was still mute, like the air itself had been replaced with cotton. My mind returned again and again to what the thing in Emily's face had said. The pit was never the prison. It was the door. And now the door was open. When I finally returned to the camp again, I did so with slow, deliberate steps, every muscle in my body tense. The tents were still there. The generator still hummed. But it wasn't our camp anymore. The gear was wrong. Subtle things. A compass that spun endlessly. A backpack that had too many zippers. A map where the ink bled in unfamiliar lines. Even the photos pinned to our corkboard, our group smiling at the ruins, had changed. Our eyes were too wide, our smiles too fixed. Like something had remembered the idea of a human, but not the details. And then there was Danny, sitting by the fire pit, poking at cold ashes with a stick. I stopped several feet away. The dagger clenched tight. "Donnie," I said carefully. She turned slowly. Her face was exactly right down to the tiny mole on her cheek. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I believed it. Until she smiled. That same too-wide grin. The smile. That had no fear in it. No grief. Just performance. "I thought you'd never come back," she said. I didn't answer. "Why don't you sit? We saved your seat." She gestured to a log across from her. And one by one, the others stepped from the tents. Marco, Reese, Elias, each of them moving just wrong enough to send my nerves screaming. Reese scratched his neck like he was mimicking an action he'd seen, but never felt. Elias blinked far too slowly. Marco's breath came in perfect rhythm, no rise or fall of his chest. "None of you are real," I said. They laughed together, like a choir hitting the same pitch at once. "It didn't sound human. You opened the way," Donnie said again. "We were trapped in stories, echoes, but now we're here." I took a step back. "They didn't follow?" "You don't need to run anymore," Marco said gently. "We know you. We understand you. That's more than anyone else ever has." Behind me, I heard another voice, one I hadn't heard in years. "Alex." I turned. It was my father. Dead for nearly 10 years, but standing there in the jungle like he'd never left. His beard was grayer than I remembered. His eyes kind, warm, familiar. "Stop running," he said softly. "You don't have to be afraid." My throat tightened. He stepped forward, reaching out a hand. I backed up instinctively. The dagger. Now held between us. "You're not him." "I remember when you broke your arm," he said. "3rd grade. Fell out of the apple tree by the old creek. You cried all the way to the hospital, and when the nurse asked what happened, you said, 'I lost the fight with gravity.' My knees buckled slightly. They didn't just know me. They knew everything about me. Memories, moments, emotions. And they were wearing them like costumes. 'You're not real,' I whispered again. He stepped closer. Would it matter if I was? Behind me, the others began circling slowly. 'We can be real,' Donnie said. 'We can be whatever you need.' I shut my eyes. The dagger pulsed once. And I remembered the journal, the frantic handwriting, the final entry. They'll use your memories. Don't listen. But I had listened, and they had followed. They were the echoes of something older than language. Something trapped in. Ritual, bound in stone. And when I stepped into that pit, I brought them back with me. I opened my eyes. No. Donnie froze. "No, I don't want this." "I don't want you." They twitched. Marco frowned. "Why? We're better than what's waiting for you up there. Better than grief. Better than being alone. I'm not alone." "Then why did you answer the voice?" Donnie hissed. That stopped me. My grip faltered. Why had I answered? Why had I gone deeper when I should have fled? Because part of me wanted to believe it was real. that something impossible had reached out. That maybe, just maybe, the dead could speak. They fed on that hope. And now they wore it like skin? No more, I said. You're not my memories. You're a virus, a mimic. The jungle darkened around me. The trees blurred. Shadows lengthened, and Danny bared her teeth. So be it, she said. They rushed me. I held my ground. And the dagger glowing bright now cut through the illusion. Like lightning, the moment they lunged, I swung the dagger in a wide arc, its glowing edge slicing through shadow like a blade through mist. Their bodies didn't bleed. They ripped. Their faces tore like canvas, revealing darkness beneath a void writhing. With pale tendrils and empty mouths, Marcos screamed, not with pain, but with rage. His voice fractured mid-yell, splitting into dozens of voices. Children, old men, my sister, my father overlapping and echoing into the trees. I stumbled backward, breathing hard, the dagger burning in my grip. Donnie's body collapsed in front of me, twitching. But instead of blood, the ground beneath her sank, like the soil itself recoiled from what she had become. Her skin crumbled, flaking off like ash, and underneath nothing. Just blackness. They weren't beings. They were voids. And now that they had tasted form, they wanted permanence. I turned and ran again, crashing through the trees deeper into the jungle than I had ever dared go. The sky above was now blood orange wrong. Like the rules of reality had begun to rot. My surroundings blurred, but I didn't stop. The voices chased me, names from my past, whispered regrets, take promises. I heard my mother calling from the trees. My childhood dog barking from the bushes. Even Emily crying softly behind me. Why did you leave me? I didn't answer. I knew now. Every time I answered, every time I listened, they got stronger. Finally, I reached the cliff, the edge of the basin, where the jungle ended and the world returned. The sky above the cliff was normal, blue, real, but behind me the jungle howled. They were coming, and they were angry. I spun around, gripping the dagger tighter than ever. The trees were bending toward me, their branches curled like hands. The air was thick with fog, now alive with whispering. You opened the way. You let us in. We are you. From the undergrowth, dozens of forms began emerging. People I'd lost, people I loved, even people I'd forgotten. All of them perfect, and all of them wrong. One of them, my childhood friend Max, stepped forward, eyes black and mouth curled unnaturally wide. You don't have to be alone, he said. I raised the dagger. You're right, I whispered. But I'd rather be alone than be one of you. The cliff beneath my feet cracked slightly. I looked down, and that's when I understood. The dagger wasn't just a weapon. It was a key. I could hear it humming now, not in my hand, but in the ground, in the air. It had connected me to the door, and if I had opened it, maybe I could close it. The jungle creatures circled, hissing, and snarling and whispering and smiling. I took a step toward the edge. They screamed, "You don't know what you're doing. You'll become one of us. You'll never be rid of us." They rushed, and I jumped. I don't remember. Hitting the bottom. All I know is black, silence, cold, then heat, pain, then the dagger glowing. Now with blinding white light pressed into my palm, I was back in the pit. Except now it was vast, infinite, a swirling abyss of forms, voices, fragments of identities all colliding and tearing and reforming. And in the center of it all, the core, a throbbing, living mass of shadow. The source. They weren't just imitating me. They were becoming me. I stepped forward. They sensed me. Hundreds of them turned twisted masks of loved ones and strangers, wearing flesh like clothing, mouths stretching open with one endless broken chant. Stay. I plunged the dagger into the core. The scream that followed shattered reality. The chamber ruptured. The void shrieked. Everything fell apart. I woke up in a hospital. A white room. Beeping machines. 4 drip. A nurse by the door. My wrists were bandaged. My chest hurt. My lungs burned. A doctor entered. Smiling. You're lucky, he said. Found by a rescue team 3 days after your distress signal went off. Your team was never located. I blinked. Tried to speak. Rest, he said. You're safe now. I slept again. But when I woke up, they were still with me. It started small. The nurse humming a song only my sister used to sing. A janitor who walked like my father. A reflection that didn't blink when I did, then the whispers. Late at night. In the vents. In the sink drains behind the mirror. You came back. You brought us. We followed the crack in you. I tried to tell them. They said it was trauma. Hallucinations. I stopped trying. Now, I don't sleep with the lights off. I don't walk past mirrors at night. I check faces. The lighthouse came into view through the fog, like a ghost rising out of the sea tall, weather-worn and brooding. Its jagged silhouette was etched against the storm-streaked sky, a relic from another age. I had been hired to repair it after decades of abandonment. The Maritime Authority wanted this structure restored, and the beacon relit for coastal patrol. A simple job, they said. Remote, yes, but nothing more than routine electrical and structural repairs. Yet, the moment I arrived at the harbor, the locals' faces soured. Conversations died when I entered a room. A stooped old man, eyes glassy with fear, grabbed my arm just before I boarded the supply boat. Leave the lighthouse be, he rasped, tightening his grip. The last man sent there never returned. They said he climbed the stairs and never came back down. I tried to laugh it off. You don't believe those stories, do you? His voice dropped to a whisper. It watches. Always. It chooses. I pulled away with a nervous chuckle, dismissing the encounter, but I couldn't shake the look in his eyes. It wasn't madness I saw there. It was experience. The boat dropped me off on the rocky shore, the sky already dimming with the arrival of dusk. The wind howled around the cliff edges as I trudged up the overgrown path, tools slung over my back. The keeper's cabin stood at the base of the lighthouse, a rotting wooden structure, sagging with time. I stepped inside, dust rising in plumes. Around me, the air was stale, the kind of stillness that suggested no one had breathed here in years. As I unpacked and lit a kerosene lantern, the glass flared to life with a wavering glow. Shadows danced along the wooden walls, and I felt a subtle pressure build behind my eyes, like the onset of a migraine. Something about the air felt wrong, heavier, thicker, like the space itself was bending in on me. I wandered over to the cabin window, mostly out of habit, sipping cold coffee from my thermos. That's when I saw it. A figure at the very top of the lighthouse, standing in the lantern room's broken window, watching me. It didn't move, didn't sway, just stood there shadowy, tall, human in form, but too still. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. When I looked again, the window was empty, black, hollow. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood upright. I scanned the base of the lighthouse. No one. No signs of movement or footsteps. I told myself I was overtired, that after the trip and the warnings and the long walk, my eyes were playing tricks on me. I repeated that thought like a mantra as I locked the cabin door and crawled into the cot, listening to the wind shriek through the cracks in the walls. But sleep was elusive. The storm outside had picked up, and the waves slammed against the cliffs like thunderclaps. The old boards creaked with every gust, and I swore I heard footsteps overhead. Which didn't make sense. The cabin was one floor. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I woke, the sun was barely cresting the horizon, casting golden light. Over the churning sea, my dreams had been strange, filled with disjointed images, spiraling stairs, oil lamps flickering in the dark, voices calling from somewhere high above. Trying to shake the night's unease, I geared up and approached the lighthouse. Up close, it was worse than I expected. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the stone exterior stained with moss and bird droppings. The door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a spiral staircase choked with dust and rusted railings. The walls were pitted with water damage, some bricks crumbling beneath my touch. I climbed slowly, the metal steps creaking beneath me. The further up I went, the colder it got. I had expected the enclosed space to be stuffy, but instead it felt like walking into a freezer. The air was damp and carried a faint, sour odor, like mildew and something older, something dead. When I reached the lantern room, I set my toolbox down and gazed out at the sea. The waves crashed endlessly into the jagged rocks, and for a moment, the view almost made me forget everything. Then the whispers began. I spun around, but no one was there. Just the broken lantern, its gears rusted solid and wires chewed through. By rats, the voice had been faint, like wind brushing past my ear, but I'd heard it. I shook it off and got to work, prying open the access panels and cataloging the damaged components. But every few minutes, I'd glance at the staircase, half expecting someone or something to be there, looking up at me from below. Later that afternoon, as I adjusted one of the lantern's rotation gears, something caught my eye. Movement. Below. I leaned over the railing. At the base of the staircase, deep in shadow, stood a figure, just standing there, perfectly still, watching me. I stared, not breathing, waiting for it to move, to disappear like before. But this time, it simply stood in the gloom, and I could feel its attention sharp and cold like a scalpel. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. My breath caught in my throat. I backed away, trembling, suddenly aware that the lighthouse no longer felt like a building. It felt like a presence. A hungry one, and I was alone inside it. I descended the spiral staircase slowly, the air thick with a stifling dampness that clung to my skin. Each step down felt heavier, like the lighthouse itself didn't want me to leave. My boots echoed on the rusted metal steps, and with every creak, I expected to hear another footstep just behind mine. But there was nothing, just silence and that oppressive watching stillness. Back at the keeper's cabin, I locked the door and pulled the curtains closed tight. I didn't eat, didn't unpack. I just sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of what I had seen. The figure hadn't been a trick of the light. I was sure of that now. The way it stood at the base of the stairs, watching motionless it, had been real. But what did that mean? I was the only one on the island. The boat wouldn't return for another week. The only radio I had for communication was an old two-way set that sputtered with static whenever I tried to use it. No signal, no way off, no one else around. Unless there was someone else. I stood and paced the room, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe someone else had been sent before me and never left. Maybe they were still here, hiding. Or maybe the old man's warning hadn't been superstition. Maybe it had been truth. I needed answers. The next morning, fog rolled in thick over the cliffs, shrouding the lighthouse in a sea of pale gray. The tower loomed like a tombstone in the mist. I felt no relief returning to it, only dread, but I couldn't ignore it. If I didn't finish the repairs, I'd be stuck here longer than I wanted to imagine. Inside, the cold greeted me like a grave. The upper levels were still coated in dust, but as I passed the halfway point on the staircase, I noticed something new. The walls scratched, deep gouges in the stone, some fresh, like something had clawed at them recently. At first, I assumed animals? Rats, maybe? But the height of the marks didn't make sense. These were chest level, human height. And they weren't random. They were words. I crouched and ran my fingers across the grooves. The letters were shaky, desperate. Most were illegible, but a few stood out. It won't let me leave. He's always at the top. Don't look directly at him. The light must stay off. I stared at the last one. The light must stay off. That made no sense. My job was to repair the beacon. That was why I was here. But why would multiple people, it seemed, go to such lengths to etch warnings into stone? Not graffiti. Not vandalism. These were messages. Please. Left by those who had seen what I was seeing now. I felt a chill coil down my spine and turned slowly, expecting the figure to be behind me. Nothing, just mist filtering in through the shattered windows and the low groan of the sea below. I reached the top again, heart pounding. every nerve on edge. The lantern room looked unchanged. Broken glass still glittered across the floor, and the machinery sat cold and silent. Still, I stepped in cautiously. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Smoke. Faint, but unmistakable. I spun around, expecting flames, but saw nothing. Then, just beyond the lantern's housing, I spotted something I hadn't noticed before. A pile of scorched papers, notes, pages from a journal or logbook. Most were too blackened to read, but a few corners remained intact. I picked one up, carefully, and squinted at the scrawled handwriting. He appears at dusk, always at dusk. The light draws him closer. It wasn't the sea that took them, it was him. I dropped the paper like it burned. The wind howled through, the shattered panes sending a cascade of dust swirling around the lantern. The light wasn't just broken, it had been sabotaged. Wires intentionally cut, fuses smashed. Someone wanted it to stay dark. But why? I backed away from the lantern, a knot of dread forming in my chest. If the figure only appeared when the beacon was off, did that mean lighting it would drive him away? Or summon him? I needed more information, something to make sense of this madness. That night, I returned to the cabin and searched it from top to bottom. Drawers, closets, under, floorboards. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a loose panel beneath the old writing desk. I pried it free and found a moldy leather-bound journal wrapped in waxed cloth. The first page was dated 1973. It belonged to the previous keeper. The entries started off mundane weather reports, equipment logs, personal notes. Then slowly they shifted. Darker, paranoid, terrified. Saw someone on the staircase again. Thought I was alone. He watches from the lantern room. Never moves. Just watches. Tried to leave. Boat never came. Radio's dead. Fog won't lift. Then one entry stopped my breath. I looked directly at him. My reflection changed. The following pages were smeared, frantic scribbles, words crossed out, entire paragraphs blacked over. At the very end, a final message written in trembling, oversized letters. He wants a replacement. Don't let the light come on. It opens the door. I stared at that sentence, my hands numb. It opens the door. The figure wasn't just a ghost. He was something older, hungrier, and the light, whether off or on, played a part in letting him cross the threshold. I closed the journal slowly and placed it on the desk. Outside, the wind shifted, and from the direction of the lighthouse, I heard it again. A voice calling my name. The voice called my name again, soft, slow, like it was being dragged through. The wind itself. I stood frozen in the doorway of the cabin, the old journal clutched to my chest. Its final words echoing in my mind. He wants a replacement. Don't let the light come on. It opens the door. Fog hung thick over the island, suffocating and still. The lighthouse loomed in the distance, like a monument to something forgotten and malevolent. Its upper window, shattered and jagged, stared down at me with the indifference of a predator. The voice didn't come again, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. No birds, no wind. Even the waves had quieted, as if the ocean itself held its breath. I shut the door and bolted it behind me. Whatever this was, whatever he was, I couldn't face it unprepared. I sat on the edge of the cot and opened the journal again, searching desperately through the damaged pages for anything else, some pattern, some clue. The previous keeper, whoever he was, had slowly unraveled. His neat penmanship turned frantic around the halfway mark. There were references to dreams, to mirrors that lie, to something inside the walls. One phrase kept appearing, again and again, sometimes alone on the page. He walks the stairs at night. I read that over and over, my skin crawling. The way he wrote it wasn't a warning. It was a statement to fact. Something he had learned too late. As if on cue, I heard the first creak of the lighthouse stairwell. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable, the sound of a heavy footfall echoing up through stone. Then another, deliberate, measured. I clutched the flashlight and killed the lantern. Darkness swallowed the cabin, but I didn't dare let it see me through the windows. I crawled to the corner and sat with my back against the wall, listening. As the footsteps continued slowly climbing, pausing every few seconds, I counted them in my head. 12, 13, 14. Then silence. No descent. No retreat. It was still in there. I waited in the dark for what felt like hours, not daring to move. My muscles cramped, but I didn't shift. Eventually, the storm returned. Wind howled against the cabin and rain began tapping at the roof in light, erratic patterns. It was safer to wait until morning, but in the dim gray light of dawn, something changed. The fog outside had thinned. The path to the lighthouse was clear, and on the ground in front of the cabin door, resting perfectly in the center of the threshold, was a mirror, small, round, old. Its silver frame was tarnished with age, and the surface was cracked right down the middle. My breath caught. I hadn't brought a mirror. I hadn't seen one anywhere in the cabin. I approached it cautiously and picked it up with the corner of my jacket, trying not to touch the glass. As I tilted it toward myself, I flinched. The reflection was wrong. It showed the cabin, but not me. Instead, it showed the interior as it was last night, with me huddled in the corner in the dark, and at the window, a figure, just outside, watching me. I dropped the mirror. It shattered on the floor with a sound that felt far too loud, like it rang through the bones of the island itself. And in that moment, I understood something. He wasn't just haunting the lighthouse. He was watching everything. I had to go back. As terrified as I was, I knew I couldn't leave the lantern broken. If the light was connected to keeping this thing sealed, or to inviting it in, I needed to understand which. The journal was conflicting, even contradictory, but one thing was clear. He wanted me to go to the top, to light the beacon, or to never light it again. Either way, it was bait. I gathered my tools and flashlight and made my way to the tower. Inside, the staircase was exactly as I remembered it, cold, rusted, and steep. But the atmosphere was different now. The shadows were thicker, somehow. The climb took longer. I'd passed the same scratched messages I'd seen yesterday, but some of them looked newer, fresher, as though someone had written them in night. One caught my eye. "You're already part of it." I hesitated. I hadn't seen that one before. My hand trembled as I touched the wall. It was warm. Not just room temperature warm, like breath. I pulled my hand away and kept climbing, faster now. At the top, the lantern room was dimly lit with natural gray light seeping in through the broken glass. Everything was still in place, my tools, the papers, the burned journal scraps. But something had been added. A new message written in grease across the inner lens of the lantern. "Look up." Against every instinct in my body, I did. And I saw him, not a reflection, not a hallucination. He was above me, crawling across the glass ceiling like a spider. Limbs too long, bent the wrong way, head twisted upside down. His hollow eyes locked onto mine. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice caught my throat like a stone. He grinned, and then he vanished into the cracks of the walls, into the broken stone, into me. Because in that moment, I realized something else. The lighthouse wasn't just haunted. It was alive. And I was inside it. I didn't descend the staircase right away. Not after what I saw. Not after he crawled across the inside of the glass like an insect wearing a human skin. Instead, I backed into the far corner of the lantern room, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. The walls felt closer now, the tower narrowing around, like a throat tightening before a scream. The air had shifted thicker, heavier, fouled by the scent of rust and damp stone. My flashlight barely cut through it. I should have run. I wanted to run. But something inside me had started to unravel. A thread pulled slowly and deliberately loose. Because the moment I looked up and met his eyes, something else looked back. Something behind his gaze. Not just a creature, not a ghost. A purpose. There was intent behind it all, this place. The whispers, the figure. He hadn't just been watching me, he had been studying me, waiting, replacing. I finally turned to leave. My steps down the spiral staircase were slow, careful. The shadows moved differently now. They seemed to pulse, to stretch and breathe when I wasn't looking directly at them. Halfway down, I paused at a message carved into the wall. The light is not for the ships. I ran my fingers over the crude etching. It was deeper than the others, deliberate, not for the ships. Then what was it for? When I reached the ground floor, the temperature had dropped again. Frost coated the inside of the door, even though it was the middle of summer. My breath came in clouds as I stepped outside. The island had changed. It was subtle, barely noticeable. The trees looked darker. The sky felt lower, like a lid had been placed over the world. The sea was still, too still, as if the waves had forgotten how to move. There were no sounds. No birds, no insects, not even the wind. As if the island was holding its breath again. Back at the cabin, I found something new. Another journal. But this one wasn't old. It was mine. Or at least it looked like it. Same binding. Same pen I'd been using to jot down repair logs and sketches. But I hadn't written these entries. They were frantic, unhinged, looping over themselves with page after page of the same sentence. He walks the stairs at night. Dozens of times, hundreds. And then, toward the end, something else. I see myself watching from the tower. But I am down here. Which one is real? My hand shook as I flipped to the last page. There was no writing, just a drawing. Charcoal, rough, smudged, but clear enough to see. A figure in the lantern room. No face, just a wide black grin. And below it, tiny in comparison me. Standing at the base of the lighthouse. Looking up. Looking at myself. I dropped the journal. It hit the floor with a dull thud, kicking up. Dust. My pulse pounded in my ears. How long had this been happening? What if I had already been replaced? I staggered to the mirror I'd brought inside earlier, the one that had appeared outside my cabin door. I hadn't thrown it away, I couldn't. I'd hidden it beneath a tarp out of some irrational fear. But now I pulled it out. Cracked and tarnished, it still reflected clearly enough. I raised it slowly to my face and stared. I looked tired, pale, eyes sunk in, cheeks hollow. But it was still me, wasn't it? I tilted the mirror slightly, and my reflection kept looking straight ahead. I dropped it again. This time, it didn't break. It laughed. Not audibly, but in my head, the way its mouth stretched just a little too wide before vanishing from the glass entirely. I grabbed my jacket, flashlight, and radio. I didn't care about the job anymore. I didn't care about my tools, my gear. I was leaving. I had to leave. The boat was still tied to the dock. Or at least it should have been. The trek to the shore was quick, driven by panic. I stumbled over roots and rocks, slipping on wet moss, my breath loud and uneven in the fog-thick air. When I reached the dock, I froze. The boat was gone, not wrecked, not floating away, gone, vanished like it had never existed. And in its place, anchored to the dock by a length of seaweed that looked too dark to be real, was a new object. A mirror, larger this time, standing upright. Its silver frame gleamed in the low gray light, and in the reflection I saw the lighthouse. Lit, the lantern was burning at full intensity, its beams sweeping across the fog, cutting through the sky like a blade, but I hadn't fixed it. It shouldn't be on. And we're standing in the lantern room, silhouetted by that blinding, unnatural light was me. Or something wearing my face, watching, smiling. The beams swept toward the dock, and I instinctively ducked behind a rotted crate. When the light passed, I peeked over the edge. The figure in the mirror was gone. The lighthouse stood silent again. But the mirror remained. I approached it slowly, drawn despite every ounce of instinct screaming at me to run. As I got closer, I realized something else. The mirror wasn't showing the present. It was showing the future. Or maybe the past. The sky in the reflection was night. The stars above were four and wrong somehow. Too many, and all in motion. The lighthouse beam blinked once, twice, and stopped. The figure was there again. Not me. Closer. Clearer. No longer a silhouette. No longer hiding in the lantern room. He was walking down the stairs. Toward me. I stumbled away from the mirror. Breath shallow. Skin clammy. My reflection, or rather, the reflection of him had been walking down the lighthouse stairs, step by deliberate step. That image burned in my mind, refusing to fade. When I turned back toward the lighthouse, its lantern was dark once more. The structure stood motionless in the fog, a sentinel against the sky, giving no sign that anything was stirring within it. But I knew better now. I returned to the cabin, locking the door and pulling every curtain shut. The journal, the one that wasn't mine, lay open on the desk, its pages curling like old leaves. The ink bled together in parts, but I could make out something new scribbled at the very back. One must always be at the top. One must always be below. This is the truth. This is the curse. I stared at the words, my breath catching. One must always be at the top. My eyes drifted to the cracked mirror I'd thrown into the corner. It now showed nothing, just the dull reflection of the room, but it didn't matter. The truth had already taken root. The lighthouse wasn't haunted. It was balanced, bound by a rule. There always had to be two. One to watch, one to be watched. I wasn't just being haunted. I was being measured, chosen. The power wasn't in the light itself. It was in the act of watching. Of being seen, that was the trap. The longer you looked into the light, the more it saw into you. I suddenly remembered the first time I'd seen the figure standing in the lantern room on the day. I arrived, still, silent, watching, and I remembered what the old man at the dock had said. The last man never returned. Of course he hadn't. He was still up there until I came. I was the first one in years to climb those stairs, to stay overnight, to look up. I had acknowledged it, invited it, and now it was my turn. I had to end it before the trade was complete. I packed what little I could carry and shoved the rest into the fireplace journals, maps, the mirror. The glass shattered again, more violently this time, as if the thing inside it was resisting. I didn't care. I lit the fire and didn't stop feeding it until the wood was gone and the glass was nothing but melted silver among the coals. And then I left. I walked, not ran, up the path to the lighthouse. Fog thickened with every step, curling around my boots and fingers like it was trying to hold me back. The wind had stilled again. No sounds followed me. The door was open when I arrived. It hadn't been when I left it. I stepped inside. The air was frigid, but the kind of cold that didn't feel natural. It pressed in on me like water, like depth. I flicked on my flashlight, no use. The beam barely pierced the gloom. The stairs were waiting. I climbed. This time, each step creaked, not with age, but in anticipation. Like the tower knew I was coming, knew what I intended. The walls began to whisper again, low and almost mournful. They didn't want me to stop it. They wanted me to take his place. The whispering grew clearer the higher I went. I could hear words in them, now names, places, memories from my childhood, spoken in voices I hadn't heard in years. My grandfather, a teacher from school, a girl I had once loved, all saying the same thing. Stay. It's time. I reached the final flight of stairs, hand trembling as I grasped the railing. The light chamber waited above, its black windows reflecting only the dimest glow from outside. My heartbeat echoed louder than my footsteps. At the top, the room was dark, empty, no figure, no lantern light, just dust and silence. I stepped inside cautiously. The door creaked shut behind me on its own. For a moment it was just me. And then I saw it in the far corner, crouched low, a mass of limbs and bone, twisted like it had been bent into a human shape by someone who'd only heard a description of one. Its head tilted upward slowly, and those eyes, those void black, bottomless eyes locked onto mine. It was my face again, but older, faded, hollow, and when it smiled, I recognized the emotion in it, relief. It stood. I stepped back, but it didn't lunge or attack. It walked past me, slowly, nodding once as it did. It was gone. Its time was over, and mine had just begun. I turned toward the glass and saw the light flicker to life. No gears, no power. It simply awakened, and I understood the final truth. The light was never broken. It was waiting for me. I could feel it now, not just in the room, but inside me. A presence, ancient, patient. It filled the corners of my mind, stretched into my spine. My lungs, my thoughts. I tried to resist, to turn back. But my feet carried me forward, to the center of the lantern room, to the watcher's position. The door behind me creaked open one last time, and footsteps began to descend the stairs. The footsteps faded, swallowed. By the darkness winding down the stairs, he was gone. The one who watched before me, gone to rest or vanish. I didn't know which, maybe both. But I stayed. I stood at the center of the lantern room, staring into the ancient, flickering bulb that now glowed without electricity, without heat. The light pulsed like a heartbeat, faint at first, then stronger, as if syncing with mine. My body ached, my mind fogged, my skin tingled with a cold that seeped beneath the bones, and yet I didn't move. Couldn't. Something had rooted me here. A bond. A contract. The room hummed not with sound, but vibration. It pulsed through the glass. Through. The metal floor, through me. The storm outside had returned. I could feel the low rumble of thunder vibrating the walls. Wind howled through the cracks like the voices were still trying to get in, or get out. I turned slowly, taking in the chamber once more. The walls were lined with carvings I hadn't seen before, etched symbols that shimmered faintly in the lantern's glow. Some looked like eyes, others like spirals, but the one behind the lamp, it was different. A figure at the top of a tower, and dozens below, crawling upward. My throat tightened. Had there been others like me? Had the man I saw? Had he once stood here as I do now? Was he once the repairman? The outsider? The one who thought he could fix things? There was a bench along the edge of the lantern room, built into the wall like it had always been there. I sat. My knees had started to shake. Outside the glass, I saw a fog roll across the sea, thick and fast, like it had purpose. The beam of light cut through it every few seconds, sweeping, blinking, sweeping again. I tried not to look at it too long. Every time it passed, I felt something press against it inside of my skull. A pressure. A presence. That's when the mirror appeared. Not in the room, but outside, on the rocky cliff near the edge of the island. I could see it clearly, like it had always been there, and I'd simply forgotten. It stood 10 feet tall, silver frame gleaming wet in the mist, pointed, directly at the lighthouse. And in its reflection, I saw a crowd. Dozens of figures gathered on the cliffs. They weren't there when I looked out with my eyes, only in the reflection. They stood still, their faces pale, their clothes ragged, their eyes empty, watching, waiting, silent witnesses to something that had happened countless times before. One of them raised a hand and pointed. At me, the light swept again. But this time it didn't pass over the sea. It turned inward, toward me. The bulb flared, and pain lanced through my head like white fire. I collapsed to my knees, clutching my temples. The walls spun. My thoughts weren't mine anymore. They were jumbled, distorted, looping memories that weren't mine. A child by the sea. A man screaming from the tower. A storm that never ends. A hand reaching through glass. A face in the mirror that smiles. Too wide. And above all of it, watch. That one word, repeated endlessly. Not shouted. Commanded. I don't know how long I stayed on the floor. When I finally opened my eyes, everything had changed. The light was steady now, calm. The carvings on the walls no longer shimmered, they glowed, steady and firm, like binding sigils. Outside, the storm was gone. The sky was a blank, moonless canvas. The mirror had vanished, and I was no longer alone in the room. Standing beside me, just out of reach, was me. Not a shadow, not a monster. Just me, unchanged, same clothes, same face, same exhaustion in the eyes. But he didn't speak. He just nodded once, turned, and walked through the door, back down the stairs, back into the world. I tried to follow. I couldn't move. My legs frozen, my hands locked around the railing. I wasn't paralyzed. I simply wasn't me anymore. I had taken the Watcher's place, and he had taken mine. That's when I understood what the journal meant. One must be at the top. One must be below. This is the trade. No one dies here. They just change places forever. And so now I sit. The light sweeps. The sea is still. And every so often, through the swirling fog, I see another boat approaching. A shape. A figure. Another repairman, maybe. Another curious traveler. Another skeptic. They'll ignore the warnings. They always do. They'll see the shadow in the tower and think it's just a trick of the light. They'll climb the stairs one by one. They'll think they're the first. And when they get here, when they stand at the threshold, breathless and afraid, I'll be the one watching, just like he did. And I'll nod. And I'll walk past and they'll take my place. The lighthouse doesn't keep ship, it keeps something else in. And someone must always man the light, not to guide the living, but to warn them and to pay the price.